So a big hello to all you fans out there that have been following the pattern puzzles. What I'm going to do here today is looking at the single twist from last week. It was one of our pattern puzzles. It's where I offered two versions of doing a twist skirt. And so we've got a little interest in this single twist, so I'm going to cut it as a pattern. And what I have traced out here is my stretch skirt block that is 5 centimeters smaller than my actual body fit. And so I'm expecting this skirt here, okay, so on the hip line it measures 5 centimeters smaller than my actual body measurement. So it's what we call under spec. And so if my hip is 101, what I want here is one size off, and this is a crude measure, but it's a good place to start. And by one size I mean 5 centimeters or 2 inches, and that brings me back to 96. That's what I've got on the hip. When I've calculated the waist and made the stretch block, I have taken my waist measurement, it's 82, and I've taken away a size, and so I have got a 77. And so in both cases, waist and hip, it's one size smaller than my actual body measurements. It's coming down from the side seam. This, as a skirt block, was already tapered by 1 centimeter. I've just pushed that in another 1 cm, so it's a total of 2 off the hip measurement. Now it's 22.5, so it's an tapering of 2 cm each side seam, which is a total of 8 cm in the whole skirt. So let's just look at what we've got here. We've got a single twist front, and this is my pattern plan. So let me show you how I'm going to apply this to my stretch skirt block. Now, in the pattern puzzle, I made it shorter. I'm probably never going to wear a skirt that short. I want knee measurement, and for me, that's waist to knee is 60 centimeters, and this is what this skirt block is. This is my knee level. And that was a hem that's no longer important. So I'm going to work to the knee level, and I just need to pick this location. This is where all the activity happens. So it's generally where we will have the twist in our skirt. Now, because we're pushing the fabric around, it will shift a little. It'll probably pull up in the front a tiny bit, but it's for us to choose where we'd like that twist to happen. So working up on this center front line, I'm going to go up, I think, for 14 centimeters, and I'm going to build this detail in that 40 centimeter space. And so roughly I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 segments. So just split that evenly, that should be fine. And what I'd like to do is if this is where I'm going to add extra fabric for my twist, I can choose the direction this twist sun rays. Wherever I put the lines for opening up the pattern is where the drape should end up. So from the top mark, I'm going to head up towards the hip. And what I'm representing here is this line. One of these, it'll be this one here, will end up being a seam. The seam that you see coming through here. So I want to hide the seam of the twist as much as I can. So I'm going to pick a spot. I'm going to stay with this pattern plan. So it's above the hip. Let's make it 5 cm. So let's make this 5 cm above the hip. I'd like to keep the effect equal at this stage. We're not doing an asymmetric style. And I'll join that 5 centimeter mark with the top. Do the same on the other side and join the top mark with the 5 centimetre position. Now, working my way down the side of this skirt, the second mark I'm going to take to below the hip. The third mark, I'm actually going to make a modification here. I'm going to do these as much more equal portions. So for the second mark here, the third mark, and I'm really just eyeballing this. I don't know that it's... So I have changed it from my original pattern plan that I used in the blog. And I imagine if I did this skirt again next week, I'd put these in a different position. So that's, it's making a choice as to how this theoretically should drape out of the twist. And so that I get, so using a right angle, transferring this mark across, ruler's not quite long enough, so I'll use a right angle here and then an extension ruler just to get the right mark. Same for this third mark here. And there's the fourth mark. So these are going to behave exactly the same on both sides. And so what I intend doing is, this will be a seam, and each of these lines will be cut open, little scissor symbol here for you, and opened down at this end the amount of fabric we need. At this end it's 0. We are not putting fabric into the side seam in this style. And down here, how much we add in will depend very much on the fabric we're using. And so I'm thinking of a decent weight ponte, very stretchy, quite sculptural in behaviour. Let me get a piece of that. So here's an example piece. I don't know how much you can see, this black makes it a little difficult, but this is quite a robust sculptural fabric. It's got a lot of stretch in it, and it's got really, really good recovery. So this is what we're going to make the style in. And so when we make the twist, effectively, we'll be doing this. Now this is quite a decent weight. I don't want them to end up being very skinny, pathetic little drapes, so I am thinking that I'm going to put at least 6 centimetres. That's my estimate at this stage. So just looking at how much paper I need to do my tracing, I will need at least the skirt length plus 6, 12, 18, 24 centimetres. So, as you can see, this is quite light paper. You can see through it, which is fantastic. It's about 40 GSM, and this paper here is about 50, so they're quite different. This is a bit more robust. And so what I intend doing here is, this part of the skirt does not change. It's only when we get to here that we're going to start opening up. So if I move the paper across and start my tracing over here on the left side seam, I'll come across the waist, down the side seam to this first line for both sides of this skirt. And if you're wondering why I'm drawing inside this line, this particular block was in fact a pattern, and that was my seam allowance, and I've taken it off. I really don't like making patterns with seam allowances on. I always find it quite confusing. Seam allowances come later. That's still my hip line, so leave a little bit of information there. Through to the other side. Be as accurate as you can with this tracing. Freehanding is probably not an option, certainly not if you want to be accurate. Use your rulers, use your curved rulers. And so I'm going to cut up here and open the pattern out. Now the method I use doesn't cut the paper. I will mark the 6 centimetres I think I'd like here. I'm going to hold the pattern at 0 and I'm going to open it out for 6. So I kind of ballparked that, you see it's in there. And then I'm going to draw the next section. Measure 6 centimetres away, hold on the 0 point and open. And mark the next section. Hold on the 0 point. Oops. First things first, put in your 6 centimetre mark. And mark the third section. Oops. Mark a 6, hold on the 0, open to 6, and then go down to the last section, which is the hem. Now, if you would like to I'll recap for a minute. I have traced the top of the skirt, there's the waistline, there's the left-hand side, the right-hand side, and I've opened up one side only. And I've done that on the centre front line. So just to bring it back here, I've made an exact copy of that shape and then just used this side of the centre front line to open up. Because to get our single twist, I need exactly that same shape on the other side, turned upside down. And so now let me try and make some sense of that for you. This is the right hand side of the skirt. I will ultimately make a duplicate copy of this section to put on this side, and we'll reverse it up so a single twist will bring it back together. Now we've got our extra fabric here to get this shape, and to also account, we will, how can I say, we will lose some fabric in the twist. So if we kept hardcore to these measurements, it could be a bit tight. It's sometimes wise to leave a little space between the two shapes. And so I'm going to draw a line that connects the bottom of here of the main skirt piece, and I'm going to connect it to the end, which is our hem and centre front. And what you can see here is that we've just chopped off some width. We can't do that. We don't want to make it smaller, but we need a clean line to flip the pattern on. And so that's our clean line to allow enough room for the width of the skirt here. That difference appears to be around about 1.5 centimetres. So I think 1.5 brings it back to a fit measurement. Gives you a little extra in the hem, but we're still working on a clean line, which allows us to reverse the pattern out. And I think this extra length here, 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 and here totally will help. That'll be what will be taken up in the twist. And so in order to put this piece over there the other way up, I'm going to make an exact copy of this with the same paper. So once again, nice and thin, I can see through this. And this will be, represents the edge over here that will get seamed back. And I just want, for the moment, an exact copy of this shape. That's the hem, and this is going up the side seam. What you will see here that we have to tidy up is this side seam's got all awkward. It's got corners in it, and we don't want that. Let me put in these original pattern pieces so that when we get to the other side it might make a little bit more sense to everyone. And so you don't need to, in fact, do this. I'm doing it for the purposes of teaching and learning. And so just to recap, the waist of the skirt, the side seam, the centre front line. I've taken a copy of this shape that I intend putting over there. The copy starts here, which is the first cut line in the skirt for adding extra fabric. It is also the same on the other side. It's the seam line that allows us to make the twist. So what's above here is skirt. That's new and extra fabric. Original skirt block, new fabric, original skirt block, extra, extra. And so sometimes I do that so I can just keep a handle on exactly how much extra fabric I've put in here. Let me just clean this off here. And I'm going to cut this piece out so I can flip it and put it on the other side. I've forgotten. I'm just going to deal with these. So this is the easiest way. We do not want these awkward corners in our pattern. We will clean that up and make this one delightful clean line. We don't want to fundamentally change the shape of the thing. We just want it to run smoothly. So if I cut along this front line, rid of this paper. I'm going to leave enough to add seam allowance. So, the waist, the front of the skirt, our centre front line, left side seam, right side seam. The bottom right of the skirt, where we have opened up, added 6 centimetres in each of these openings to give us fabric for the twist. And so I've made an exact copy of that shape. And if you were to do this in a symmetrical way, it's the bit that belongs here. Except I want this to come together with a twist. So if I take this piece over to the other side of the line and then turn it this way up. And so, let me slide this up a bit more. This line here, which is our seam on the left-hand side, matches this seam down here. And when we make this, we will twist this over and join those seams to get our single twist. We've got a little bit of extra fabric. Let me just finish these lines off so we can see them logically. And this I'm going to use some masking tape to add this pattern piece. And I don't really like masking tape on the front of my pattern, so I always put it on the back in the area that I need it. So the masking tape is on the back in the drape section, and so remember it's upside down, so that's hem, that's the diagonal in the skirt, that's the same diagonal that becomes a seam. Let's place these on top, line them up. And largely what we have is our pattern piece here. Now, probably should have talked about some notches, so let's go back a step, because I really would like a notch or two here to match back there, so I don't push this fabric around too much when it comes to the actual making. So this is the seam. And I think I'll just be very generous with myself and put a notch here and a notch here. And then transfer. This is why I like to keep a blueprint. I've got all the information on here for anything I'm doing to this skirt. So notch, notch, and that also means that the piece of the garment that's going to be sewn to it, which is all the way down here, also has to have those notches. So find that edge. So find that edge on the lower part of this garment and put those notches in. And that gives us two very accurate points when we twist this piece and stitch it back to there. And so perhaps one of the things I haven't mentioned with this particular single twist is that your fabric has to be as good on both sides of the cloth. And I'm sure this is quite difficult to see with the video, but this Ponte is exactly the same both sides, which is what we're calling a double knit. And so the knit looks the same on this side as the other. And so when we do that reverse, there's not a great deal of difference, and it's generally considered quite acceptable level of difference. Now there's only a couple of things we need to deal with now. We've got our notches that are going to match back together. So this is hem right here, and so is that. But because hem bleeds into seam, we're going to have to keep them the same, I think. Certainly for the first 12, that's what I'll do. And although I don't need all of it, I'm going to put 1 centimetre on my seams, and for the moment, for the first 12, it'll only be 1 centimetre on the hem. We will probably want a notch here to tell us that's the middle of the twist. On this side, we have a corner. Now, I don't think that's going to behave terribly well in jersey, because when we twist and we seam these two together, there will be a whole bunch of drape in the way, and so we will not get all the way into here. It's as if that last bit of the seam just disappears into the twist. So to make that, shall we say, behave better, I'm going to put a curve on here. Of course, everything's in the testing. It remains to be seen whether that was a clever thing to do or not. We'll see. And so this is here. But what I might do, so that we know exactly where the middle is, the same as we do down here, is I will find the very center of that. And consider that the corresponding notch. We will not get that far in our sewing. That's the nature of the single twist. So seam allowances. Usually with a jersey pattern, it's going to go, going to use that 4-thread mock safety stitch. We would put 8mm, sometimes 7mm, but probably 8mm on a skirt like this. But because it's also hem, we're going to do 1 centimetre. And I would suggest 1 centimetre for the side seams. We'll talk about the waist in a moment. And so this is one of the hems, and we're staying with the centimetre. So just finishing off the seam allowances, I'm using 1 centimetre on nearly all of the seams here, but there will be one exception, the waistline. I'm going to keep this quite simple in this style and probably put a narrow bind on the waist and no zip, because this is Ponte, and maybe I'll hide a little bit of that transparent elastic inside the bind to give the waist a little bit more strength. But having said that, to put a bind on here, I really do want a small seam allowance, and I want 1/4 inch, or in metric that would be 7mm will do. So here we have the whole pattern, and I'm going to cut it out so you can see its delightfully weird shape. So here's your pattern piece. It's looking very odd, which is as it should be. If this is scaring you, have some faith. If you can get somewhere close to this, once we've cut the fabric, and I will make some video of this, and we use all of these notches, we will be turning this up and joining this seam together, and we will run it as far as we can towards that notch, knowing that there's a matching notch here. So we will keep fairly accurate in our meeting of the fabrics, because we've got 1, 2, and 3 notches to match up. So that's the front, and that's where all the feature is. Coming back to the draft. And so here's the slightly scary assumption, and we'll see how, we'll see how well this works in time. But the assumption is that's my front and my back. So a clean copy of this shape as a back pattern with the centre back fold, so it's centre front. This blueprint, this is centre front and centre back, but without all the drape detail, and we're ready to make our first sample.